Salutations Rangers, General Bradley 101 back again with some more lore. And today's video, boys and gals, we are back with our What People Get Wrong About X series. And today, we're talking about the Thousand Suns. The signs of Prospero have long been misunderstood. And in today's video, we're going to find out just exactly what the Sons of Magnus are truly capable of. But without any further ado, let's get started with today's video. The 15th Legionaries Astartes, known as the Thousand Suns. And immediately from the get-go, the Thousand Suns were always meant to be a psychic legion. Their first ever aspirants were the student aspirants that were chosen from the notoriously psychically gifted individuals that were the citizens of the former Achaemenid Empire. Those individuals from the highest ranking families with the most notable intelligence, the greatest skill, but most importantly the highest aptitude for psychics, were chosen to form the core of the 15th. However, when the 15th was first formed in its alpha induction phase, it did not possess the normal 3,000 Marines, but rather it possessed 1,000. You'll notice that throughout the entirety of the Thousand Suns history, their number always revolves around 1,000. When they first met up with Magnus, the flesh change had reduced them to 1,000, and after the Battle of Prospero, they were reduced to 1,000 yet again. Something Zinch. But I mentioned the flesh change. You see, the Thousand Suns had a genetic defect, known as the flesh change. Essentially, it would cause them to explode in violent mutations, and essentially turn them into some form of chaos abomination, aka a chaos spawn. This would then cause Thousand Suns to slowly dwindle throughout the heresy. They were an incredibly effective fighting force, but considering that every time you go out you could have a few of your boys burst into giant balls of flesh, tentacles and teeth, it's a bit bad for tactical flexibility to say the least. But that all changed when Magnus the Red found his sons. Magnus was able to cure the flesh change at the loss of an eye, although we later find out that this was because he made a deal with Tzeentch accidentally. He didn't know it was Tzeentch, and Tzeentch didn't tell him, and Tzeentch actually lied. Tzeentch was the one who made the flesh change. He didn't stop the flesh change, but just put it on pause, and waited until the right exact moment to return it, when he would finally lay his clutches into Magnus himself. Magnus and his legion would continue to serve loyally and admirably, and they had no bitter feelings towards the Imperium or the Emperor, even after the Edict of Nicaea, which essentially lobotomized the Legion. When you tell the Psychic Legion you can't do psychics, you'd be less than stupid if you didn't expect them to be upset. But, truth be told, even if they were a bit bitter about it, they still held true and loyal. In fact, it was only after the devastation of Prospero that the Thousand Suns could truly have said to have turned away from the Emperor. But we'll talk more about that later. From there, they would be transferred to the planet of Sorcerers, and they would become the sworn chosen legion of Tzeentch. And the Thousand Suns, being one of the Big Four, have played a very important part throughout the entirety of Warhammer 40k's history, including launching several invasions into real space, as well as several important warbands and figureheads, making up a good part of Warhammer 40k's stories. But that's the TLDR. But now let's talk about what do people get wrong about the Thousand Suns. And quite simply, they are the strongest. Now I'm well aware that is a big thing to say, but allow me to explain. You see, the Thousand Suns are a Psyker Legion. Every single Space Marine in the Thousand Suns Legion possessed some form of psychic potential. The difference isn't how extreme that psychic potential was, but the fact of the matter is, you already had trained Astartes, the best soldiers ever, and you give them magic powers? People always underestimate how much of a deadly force the Thousand Suns are. Not to mention, if they weren't hampered by the flesh change, their numbers would have grown exponentially. And if Magnus had not fallen and continued to grow his legion, most people estimate that they would have ended up around the 120,000, 150,000 mark, placing them in the middle or upper echelons of the legions. Now, when people talk about the strongest legion, there are many different answers and questions and queries and all that. What people fail to understand is that psychic powers in 40k are hilariously powerful. Psychic powers are one of those things where people don't really know much about it. Mainly because whenever psychic stuff is brought up in Warhammer 40k, it's usually meant to be hand-waved away. Oh, what happened? Oh, psychic nonsense. That's it, that's there, it's done. And because of that, most people fail to identify psychic powers as a tangible, concrete threat, because more often than not, they're just hand-waved away for nonsense. But don't do that. Understand that psychic power in 40k is terribly potent. When a Space Marine sees a Psyker, even a normal human Psyker, that gives them pause for concern, because a Psyker can do literal magic, and as good as a Space Marine is, they're not immune to magic. The Astartes showed this perfectly. Space Marines are all well good and dandy, unless there's a Psyker who can use the Force. Then they're kinda cooked. They can still overcome it, but that's still a pseudo-normal Psyker. What about a Space Marine Librarian though? You know, you think about Tigurius. He is arguably one of the strongest psykers in all of 40k, but he's a Space Marine psyker. Space Marine librarians are notoriously powerful. I mean, you take a look at any type of notable librarian throughout any type of Space Marine, they've never been pushovers. And the only time they've ever been bested is by usually other heavy-hitting psychic powers. So now, you take that, and then you take a whole legion made out of them, approximately 85 to 90,000 of these boys. Not only that, but with a magical Primarch at the helm, who is second only to the Emperor of Mankind himself, and you recognize the fact that they're in fact a mechanized force. Yes, but built on setup of the Thousand Sons is that their preferred combat doctrine was mechanized infantry assault, swaths of APCs and IFVs backed up by a few main battle tanks. So you have a legion of magic users who utilize one of the strongest methods of war that we know, and you combine the fact that they are led by the greatest psyker other than the Emperor of Mankind himself. And when you put all that together in context, it's fair to ask yourself, hey, why aren't these guys ever in the question for the best legion? Well, that's because people don't recognize this. Because they simply look at the Burning of Prospero. The Burning of Prospero is one of the most misunderstood elements in all of Warhammer 40k. If you ask a normal person, well, I say normal person, a normal fan of Warhammer 40k, they're most likely going to tell you, oh, it's when the Space Wolves bodied the Thousand Sons, and Leman Russ broke Magnus's back. And again, that is a very, very base reasoning, but that's not what happened at all. It wasn't just the Space Wolves, it was the Space Wolves and a ginormous amount of Sisters of Silence and Custodes. Regardless of how much psychic magic a Space Marine may have, a Custodes is still going to win most times out of not. Not to mention, Sisters of Silence are quite literally the anti-Space Marine psyker. They are blanks, they are the blank, they are the anti-psyker. They're quite literally a 120,000% direct counter to the Thousand Sons. You combine that with the fact that the Thousand Sons did not know this was happening, the fact that the Thousand Sons were caught in an ambush, having a great deal of their forces destroyed beforehand, the fact that Russ was on the field from the get-go and Magnus only came out in the last third, not to mention, Magnus technically won that fight. He put Leman on his ass and he was ready to kill him, but Leman's warhounds bit Magnus in the ankle, causing him to stop, and that gave Leman an opening to get a lucky strike in with his sword, taking out his other eye. And then he was able to break a blind Magnus over his back. Those are very small but very important details, because they changed the Battle of Prospero from being a one-sided slaughter into a battle that truly wounded the Wolves. The Wolves were mauled after this. Not to mention, the Custodes and Sisters of Silence both took noticeable casualties. This was a pure waste in every single sense of the word. Not only was a Loyalist Legion reduced to basically nothing, but another Loyalist Legion was mauled, and two of the most elite formations suffered wounds, which they could ill afford. Losing a few hundred Space Marines is bad. Losing a few hundred Custodes? That is something completely different. Not to mention the losses the Sister of Silence suffered. The Burning of Prospero was indeed a loss for the Thousand Sons, but it was not a complete loss. It was a very close run affair, and the Wolf King lost more blood than he ever thought possible. And when you take that into consideration, suddenly your thought process immediately changes dramatically. The Thousand Sons go from being a legion that got bodied to a legion that was always going to lose, but the fact that they put up a fight the way that they did is just something different. But now let me tell you why are they so powerful, and let's talk about the cults of the Thousand Sons. Alright, so the cults of the Thousand Sons are collectively the 5 main schools of magic in which the Thousand Sons practice. You see, every single legionary of the Thousand Sons had some type of psychic potential, and they would gravitate towards one of these 5 cults, with Magnus being known as the Supreme Grand Master of the cults, as he was said to be an expert master in each 5 of them. So, first off, we had the Anatheme cult. The Anatheme cult were masters of telepathy. Basically, in anything that involved reading people's minds or communicating through psychic thought, these guys were the Supreme Masters, with the highest of their order being able to communicate with entire chapters at once. In fact, that then led them to become the communications officers of the Legion. Not only that, they were also able to read the minds of enemy opponents as well. And here we see the true power of the Thousand Sons. Whereas a normal Spec Ops unit could go and gather information. They could go, gather, scout, maybe capture an enemy leader, torture them, get some information back here or there. But the Anatheme cult could directly pierce the minds of enemy commanders, get their entire battle plans, what they had for lunch, and what their favorite sex position is, and then give that information directly to Magnus on a silver platter. Magnus would then communicate with the squid, unknowingly mind you, and then give out his battle plans. From there, the anathema could easily distribute it to the entirety of the chapter via one person. Communication is incredibly key on the battlefield, and the anathema could do it via their minds. So, all of a sudden, if you're unable to communicate because there's an EMP blast, if the Vox is down, cool! Just charge up the old psychic telephone or one of the Space Marines and the entire chapter can be communicated with. It is incredibly useful. It's essentially a Voxnet that cannot be hacked. We next have the Corvidae. The Corvidae are the masters of precognition. Essentially, it's predicting the future. These guys were able to predict psychic omniscience. Now, this depends. The lowliest acolyte could maybe predict the future for how many brothers would be lost in engagement, to a master Corvidae even to predict some glimpses of the future. This helped incredibly well. These were the masters of strategic thinking and tactical deployments. They were able to communicate and draw up battle plans. They would confirm with the captains of the line and make sure that whatever plan the captain had, if there were any unforeseen tendencies, the Corvidae would fill it in. For example, let's say the captain had a plan to ambush the enemy, but the Corvidae would then pierce into the future and see that the past which the captain had planned, the enemy had already occupied it. Therefore, they'd be able to plan in something else in a different way, in a different manner. Being able to literally see in the future is a hell of a tactical advantage, and I don't need to tell you why. Not only that, they would also have intense bouts of precognition at certain times. For example, let's say a captain was about to be shot by a sniper, a legionary of the Corvidae would have precognition and then shove him out of the way. It's essentially like a spidey sense. Again, pretty useful. We then have the Pavani cult. The Pavani were known as physiokinesis, or magic of the body. Essentially, these were the healers. They were able to manipulate the flesh of their sons and cause them to grow and knit at a supernatural rate, even beyond that of baseline Astartes. Many Pavoni were apothecaries, and in doing so, not only did you have a skilled medical practitioner, you also had a magic cleric able to heal several battle brothers at once by casting a simple spell. Indeed, the healing magic of the Thousand Sons was just that. Healing magic. It was something totally, wholly, and utterly different. Not to mention, like all good clerics, they knew a few offensive spells as well. But instead of knowing Thunder Wave or Firebolt, they know Body Explosion. The Pavoni were able to manipulate the body chemistry of their foes, causing blood vessels to rupture, organs to combust, or to literally cause their biomaterial to become flammable and combustible. Basically, they changed skin into gunpowder. Not literally, or maybe literally, it is magic after all. But yeah, all in all, pretty useful. Then we have the Pyre cult, aka Pyromancers. I present to you D&D the Space Marine, because you know what's worse than a Space Marine with a big ass bolter and a giant knife? A Space Marine that can cast Fireball at 9th level, motherfucker, that's what. These are Pyromancers. Literally Pyromancers in anything. Flame walls, flame balls, flame cannons, flame anything, flaming bolters. Yeah, they were able to activate their bolt rounds and coat them in sheets of psychic fire. Not to mention anything regarding fire. They could control fire, they could manipulate fire, not only in an offensive way but in a defense as well. Giant chasms of flame shields. And let's say you have a burnt out rhino with boys dying inside. Not only that, but they could also lower the temperature of bodies as well. Meaning that they could often help their Pavoni. If for a particular reason the legionary was on fire or they had a very high temperature or whatever, they were very useful. Also, they could control robots. A lot of them developed secondary psychic abilities that would allow them to control and manipulate various types of automata. We have quite literal facts of there being an automata wing attached to the Thousand Sons from the Legio Cybernetica, in which case many of the Thousand Sons Pyre were indeed their masters. But we even have accounts of them controlling Titans. Bloody weird. Bloody great too. And this effectively became known as technopathy. Okay, so a Space Marine, who's also a wizard that subclassed into an artificer and that has an iron golem. Yeah, this is totally not strong. And finally, we have the Raptora cult. Now, these guys practice something called telekinesis. Telekinesis is essentially the physical manifestation of force, whereas telepathy is the mental manifestation of it. Now, these guys were known as the Durables. Now, these guys were the shields of the Legion, because they were able to develop something known as kind shields. Generally speaking, those of the Raptora cult had a personality of being friendly. They had a very much a mentoring or brotherhood mentality. They were very self-sacrificing. They were indeed the shields of the Legion. These kind shields are essentially Halo force fields, or bubble protections, or anything from any type of sci-fi. And during the fall of Prospero, they were able to create an entire kind shield that completely stopped the orbital bombardment and assault by the Space Wolves on the city of Tisca. It was only when the Sisters of Silence showed up that said bubble went down. But all in all, with the Raptora cult though, it makes them even more durable. You have a Scarab occult Terminator. Let's say his shield generators fail. Nope, Psychic Kind Shield backup, baby. I don't have to explain to you why having a magic shield is pretty potent. So, all in all, we take a look that the Thousand Sons Legion was composed of Space Marines, super augmented genetic super soldiers who could either make a shield out of thin air, get into somebody's mine, heal a person, or cause their heart to explode, fire literal fireballs, as well as predict the future. Not to mention, you place all of them inside of a mechanized formation. The Thousand Sons detested any form of attritional warfare, and they had some of the lowest casualty rates period, putting them up there towards the Ultramarines in terms of casualty prevention. That's something that Magnus was very keen about. He wanted his sons to live. Thus, they eschewed any and all type of attritional-based warfare, and their whole idea was hard-hitting, fast-moving mechanized assaults. Because you know what's worse than a Space Marine? A Wizard Space Marine. But you know what's worse than even that? A Wizard Space Marine on top of a Rhino going at Mach 10, baby. All in all, the Thousand Sons suffer similarly to the Iron Hands, the Raven Guard, and the Salamanders. Since they were removed so early in the heresy, we got a lot less about them and a lot less stories. Thus, people often boil them down to one point, and that's the Burning of Prospero. But as I've mentioned before, the Burning of Prospero is heavily taken out of context. The Thousand Sons are not only in contention for the strongest legion in terms of sheer combat ability, but it's moreover what they represented. Each Thousand Son was a scholar, the scholar unparalleled, a scholar who understood what it meant to be both a warrior and a sage. Tisca was a city of learning, of understanding. It threw away the very notion that there was nothing to be learned. That's why the Emperor's edicts of some stuff being off limits wholly went against the very culture of the city of Magnus and of the Legion. The Thousand Sons were so strong not only because they could use magic, but because they understood the situation around them. They were scholars. They had to learn everything. Even after their magical powers were taken away, they were still a terrible mechanized shock assault force. The Thousand Sons are truly a tragedy of a legion, not only in because they were a legion wholly destroyed, not only by the loyalists but by the Emperor himself when he shackled his own legion. Not only that they were supposed to be one of, if not the greatest legion, purely on combat prowess alone, but were laid low by the machinations of Tzeentch, but because they were a legion of scholars, men who were the closest thing to what the Emperor wanted after the Great Crusade. The Thousand Sons never worried what they were going to do after the Great Crusade, because they knew what they would do. They would become scholars, teachers, they'd practice their own magics, and they would live their lives like that. They'd become the light of the Imperium, bringing enlightenment and understanding to those who are lost. That is what they would do. And for chaos to reign, there can be no light. Thus, one of the greatest threats to the Chaos Gods, period, not only in terms of an Astartes Legion, but an Astartes Legion with a fundamental philosophy so different to theirs, and the ability to combat their demons was taken away. Because never forget, the Grey Knights are some of the greatest Space Marines that the Imperium has, and the Thousand Sons were Grey Knights plus, and a legion of them at that. So the next time you take a look at the Thousand Sons, they're not just a magic Egyptian legion, they're a legion of warrior sages, of wizard kings, and be wary of the wizard kings of Tisca, for the only thing greater than their thirst for knowledge is their lust of wrath. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so very much for watching. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know, did you guys always know that the Thousand Sons were so OP? And how do you think they're written? I definitely think that they were written to a corning because they're supposed to be one of the strongest legions, because literally Magic Legion. Like, they should be up there with the Lunar Wolves and the Dark Angels in terms of pure combat strength. But let me know down below, do you think GW has written them correctly? Do you think GW has written them incorrectly? But I want to thank you guys for watching, and I want to give a massive thank you to my members. Shout out to my Lieutenant tier members, Mr. Eddie Veep3 and Miss Majora of the Void. Shout out to my Sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Warsmith.Fireheart, Mr. Arbery20 Guy, and Mr. Corns Butcher. And I want to give a massive thank you to my private tier members, Mr. Thomas Moslons, Mr. Ivan_SVW, and Mr. Michael Hayada. Thank you guys also very much for being here. Thank you guys very much for watching. It means the absolute world to me. I love you. Each and every one of you do. I guys hold very special in my heart. So if you guys want to join me up, you gain access to a bunch of awesome benefits. You guys get a lot of behind the scenes stuff. You guys get a hand in choosing the videos. You get a lot of early access. And if you sign up at the Captain tier, you get a very own video requested on whatever it could be. Nothing asked. But remember, only do this if you can. This will always be free, and I will love you no matter the same. Mwah. Yes, I will. But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Bradley 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Make sure to stay loyal there, boys and girls, and I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers. I cannot wait for Dark Angels fans to come and mauled and seethe. I'm sorry, your plasma and your exindio may be great, but I cast magic lightning, motherfucker.